Autumn. Wyoming Territory. The prairie had already begun to change color. Golden grass stretched beneath a sky washed clean by the cool northern wind. Winter was still weeks away. Yet every rancher could already feel it coming. Jack Carter guided his bay gelding along a narrow trail that wound between cottonwood trees. A coil of fencing wire rested behind his saddle. He had spent the morning repairing broken posts after last night's storm. 48 years old. Broad-shouldered. Weathered by sun and years of honest work. The people of Silver Creek often described him the same way. A dependable man. A quiet man. A lonely man. 8 years had passed since pneumonia had taken his wife, Eleanor. The ranch had survived. He had survived. But the laughter inside the little log house had disappeared with her. Most evenings. The only sounds were the crackling fireplace. And the wind moving through the valley. Jack had grown accustomed to silence. He told himself it was enough. That afternoon. As he approached the western edge of his property. He noticed something unusual. A young woman sat beneath an old cottonwood tree beside the road. She wasn't resting. She was simply sitting. As though she no longer had the strength to continue. Her clothes immediately caught his attention. Not because they were beautiful. Because they had once been. A pale blue dress. Carefully stitched by hand. The fabric was worn thin around the sleeves. The hem was stained with dust from many miles of walking. A small cloth bundle rested beside her feet. Everything she owned could fit inside it. Jack slowed his horse. The woman heard the hoofbeats. She stood at once. Too quickly. Her knees almost gave way beneath her. She caught herself against the tree before falling. Jack climbed down from the saddle. He kept several respectful steps between them. Afternoon. The young woman lowered her head politely. Good afternoon, sir. Her English carried a soft Chinese accent. Careful. Measured. As though every word had been practiced many times before speaking aloud. Jack noticed her hands. Tiny cuts covered several fingers. Old burns marked the backs of her wrists. She wasn't someone who avoided work. She was someone who had worked far too much. You lost? She hesitated. Then quietly shook her head. No. You waiting for someone? Again. She shook her head. The silence stretched between them. Finally. She gathered enough courage to speak. My name is Mei. Mei Lin. Jack nodded once. I'm Jack Carter. She looked toward the ranch in the distance. The smoke rising from the chimney. The weathered barn. The horses grazing peacefully beyond the fence. Then. Very softly. She asked, do you need someone to work? Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead. He noticed how tightly she gripped the little cloth bundle. As though expecting to hear the answer she had heard many times before. No. No. Not today. I'm sorry. For a moment. Her face remained perfectly still. Then the disappointment slowly appeared. Not dramatic. Not tearful. Simply. Another door closing. She nodded politely. I understand. She bent to lift the bundle. Jack watched carefully. It looked almost weightless. Yet she struggled to pick it up. She hadn't eaten properly in days. That much was obvious. She turned to leave. The afternoon wind pushed loose strands of black hair across her face. She had taken barely 3 steps. When she stumbled. Not because the road was uneven. Because her legs no longer had enough strength. Jack reached out instinctively. Then stopped himself. Instead of catching her. He waited until she steadied herself alone. Only then did he ask, "When did you last eat?" Mei remained silent. Silence was answer enough. Jack walked toward his saddlebag. He removed a small loaf of fresh bread wrapped in cloth, along with 2 red apples. He held them out. She looked at the food, then looked away. I don't have money. I'm not selling it." Another silence. "My mother always said, never accept food you cannot repay." Jack smiled faintly. "My wife used to say something similar." The word surprised even him. He rarely spoke about Eleanor anymore. Mei slowly accepted the bread with both hands. Before taking a bite, she bowed her head. "Thank you." She broke the loaf in half. Then, instead of eating immediately, she carefully wrapped one piece back inside the cloth. Jack noticed. "Saving it?" She nodded. "For tomorrow." He understood. People who had never known hunger never saved bread before taking the first bite. People who had always did. As she finished eating, Jack quietly asked, "Where are you headed?" "I don't know." "You have family?" A long pause. "No." The answer came too quickly. Too rehearsed. Jack recognized it. It wasn't truth. It was pain. He didn't press further. Instead, he pointed toward the ranch. "You looking for work there?" "Yes." "What kind of work?" "I can cook. I can clean. I can sew. I can wash clothes. I can take care of animals. I learn quickly." Her voice remained calm. Yet every sentence sounded less like confidence, and more like pleading. Jack looked at her carefully. She couldn't have been older than 23. Yet her eyes belonged to someone much older. Someone who had learned not to expect kindness. They walked together toward the ranch. The horses grazing near the fence lifted their heads. One chestnut mare approached first. Mei stopped walking. The mare gently nudged her shoulder. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's unusual." "What?" "Daisy doesn't trust strangers." Mei slowly reached out. Not touching the mare immediately. Allowing Daisy to choose. Moments later, the horse rested her nose against Mei's hand. Jack smiled. "I guess she likes you." Mei whispered, "Animals know." "Know what?" "Who won't hurt them." The answer lingered in Jack's mind long after they reached the porch. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar and fresh coffee. Everything remained exactly as Eleanor had left it years ago. Simple. Orderly. Warm. Jack poured a bowl of vegetable stew. Then another. He placed one before Mei. She remained standing. "Aren't you hungry?" "I am." "Then sit." She looked uncertain. "I should wait." "For who?" "You." Jack pulled out the chair opposite his own. "I'm already sitting." Only then did Mei slowly take her seat. She ate quietly, without wasting a single crumb. Jack noticed she never reached for more. Even after finishing the bowl. "You can have another." She immediately shook her head. "I've had enough." Her eyes said otherwise. Jack filled the bowl again without asking. This time, she didn't refuse. When supper ended, the sun had already disappeared behind the hills. The temperature dropped quickly. Mei stood. "I should leave before dark." Jack looked toward the window. "The nearest town is almost 15 miles. She nodded. "I know. You planning to sleep outside?" I've done it before. Jack stared into the fireplace. Then slowly spoke. I told you earlier. I don't need a servant. Mei lowered her eyes. I'm sorry for troubling you. She picked up her bundle. Walked toward the door. Her hand had barely touched the handle. When Jack's voice stopped her. Mei. She turned. He stood beside the fireplace. Quiet. Thoughtful. Looking not at her clothes. Nor her worn shoes. But at the exhaustion she could no longer hide. I've been thinking. She waited. I don't need someone to scrub floors. I don't need someone to cook meals. I've managed those things for years. He paused. Choosing every word carefully. What I think you need. Isn't a job. Mei frowned slightly. I don't understand. Jack took one slow breath. Then said the words that neither of them would ever forget. I think you need a home. Silence filled the cabin. The fire crackled softly between them. Jack continued before she could misunderstand. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I'm asking you to hear me out. He stepped no closer. Keeping the same respectful distance he had kept since meeting her. I've lived alone for 8 years. You have nowhere safe to go. In this territory. A married woman has legal protection that a lone immigrant woman often doesn't. He looked directly into her eyes. So I'm offering you something unusual. A marriage. A marriage in name first. No conditions. No expectations. You'll have your own room. You'll keep your own choices. And if one day you decide to leave, I won't stop you. Mei stared at him. Unable to speak. She had knocked on one ranch. Asking only for work. Instead, a lonely rancher had offered her dignity. Outside, the prairie wind swept across the valley. Inside, neither of them realized that someone riding the distant ridge had already seen Mei enter the Carter ranch. And by sunrise, news of the mysterious Chinese woman at Jack Carter's ranch would begin spreading across Silver Creek. Jack expected Mei to refuse. Most people would have. The proposal sounded impossible. Strange. Perhaps even foolish. A man and a woman who had known each other for less than a day. One carrying years of loneliness. The other carrying years of fear. The fire crackled softly between them. Neither spoke. Mei lowered her eyes to the floor. Her fingers tightened around the small cloth bundle resting against her chest. For several long moments, the cabin remained completely silent. Finally, she whispered, "Why?" Jack frowned gently. "Why what? Why would you do something like this? For someone you don't even know?" Jack looked toward the empty rocking chair beside the fireplace. It had belonged to Eleanor. No one had sat there in 8 years. My father used to tell me something. If you have room at your table, and someone else is hungry, then the meal belongs to both of you. He smiled faintly. I've ignored that lesson for too many years. Mei looked at him for the first time since entering the cabin. She searched his face carefully. Almost suspiciously. Not because she believed he was lying. Because she had forgotten what honesty looked like. Jack continued calmly. I'm not asking you to answer tonight. You can leave in the morning. You can stay a few days. You can think. The choice belongs to you. The last sentence caught her completely off guard. The choice. She repeated the words almost to herself. Nobody had spoken to her that way in years. Perhaps no one ever had. That night, Jack prepared the spare bedroom. It was small. A single bed. A wooden dresser. One window overlooking the horse pasture. Before leaving, He placed a brass key on the bedside table. If locking the door helps you sleep, it's yours. Mei stared at the key. You mean I may lock it? Jack looked puzzled. Of course. She slowly picked it up, turning it over in her hands. Such a small object. Yet it represented something she had never possessed. Privacy. Safety. Control. After Jack closed the door, she turned the lock. The soft click echoed through the room. Instead of making her feel trapped, it made her feel protected. She sat quietly on the edge of the bed. Then, without warning, tears began slipping down her cheeks. Not loud sobs. Just silent tears. The kind that arrived after surviving too long. The following morning, Jack awoke before sunrise. He expected to find the cabin empty. He assumed Mei would leave before dawn. Instead, the smell of fresh biscuits drifted from the kitchen. He walked inside. Mei stood beside the stove. The table had already been cleaned. Coffee simmered gently. Fresh bread cooled beneath a cloth. She immediately looked nervous. I'm sorry. I used your flour. Jack blinked. You baked? She nodded cautiously. My father owned a bakery. He taught me before. Her voice faded. Before everything changed. Jack smiled. I'd say he taught you well. For the first time. A faint smile appeared on Mei's face. Small. Careful. But real. They ate breakfast together. Unlike the evening before. Mei no longer waited for permission to lift her spoon. Jack noticed. He said nothing. Healing rarely happened through speeches. Sometimes. It happened through ordinary mornings. After breakfast, Jack saddled 2 horses. You ride? Mei shook her head. I've never been on one. Then today seems like a good day to learn. She looked uncertain. What if I fall? I'll catch you. The words escaped before Jack thought about them. He immediately cleared his throat. I mean, I won't let you get hurt. Mei smiled again. This time, the smile lingered a little longer. Daisy stood patiently beside the fence. Jack showed Mei how to place one boot inside the stirrup. How to hold the saddle. How to balance. His hands remained respectful. Helping only when necessary. Within an hour, Mei was guiding Daisy slowly around the pasture. She laughed when the mare suddenly sneezed. The sound floated across the ranch. Jack stopped repairing the fence. Listening. He hadn't heard laughter on his property in years. He hadn't realized how much he missed it. Later. That afternoon. Ben Harper rode through the front gate carrying supplies. The cheerful rancher removed his hat. Morning, Jack. Then he noticed Mei. His eyebrows rose. Well. I wasn't expecting company. Jack introduced them. This is Mei. She'll be staying here for a while. Ben greeted her warmly. Pleasure to meet you, Miss Mei. She bowed politely. The pleasure is mine. Ben waited until Mei walked toward the vegetable garden. Then leaned closer. You finally hired some help. Jack hesitated. Not exactly. Ben folded his arms. What does that mean? Jack lowered his voice. I asked her to marry me. Ben nearly dropped the sack of feed. You what? Jack explained everything. From finding her on the roadside. To the proposal. Ben listened quietly. When Jack finished. The older rancher rubbed his beard thoughtfully. Well. I've known you 20 years. You've never been a fool. But this might be the closest you've come. Jack laughed. I expected that. Ben looked toward Mei. She was kneeling beside the garden, carefully pulling weeds, as though afraid she might damage the flowers. Finally, Ben sighed. If anyone deserves a safe place, it's probably that girl. Then his expression became serious. But Silver Creek won't see it that way. Jack already knew. Small towns rarely accepted unusual stories. Especially in 1888. Especially involving a Chinese immigrant woman. Ben's prediction proved correct. By evening, whispers had already begun spreading through town. Murphy's General Store buzzed with quiet conversation. I heard Jack Carter brought home a Chinese woman. They say she's living in his house. Is she his servant? I heard she's his wife. Wife? They've only just met. Old Mrs. Turner set down her basket of preserves. You all spend too much time talking. If Jack Carter has done something, I'm certain it was for the right reason. Most people nodded. Some remained unconvinced. One man sitting silently near the window listened to every word. Silas Morton, owner of the largest cattle operation east of Silver Creek. Rich. Influential. Accustomed to getting whatever he wanted. He slowly folded his newspaper. A Chinese woman. He murmured quietly. Interesting. One of the merchants glanced toward him. You know her? Silas smiled faintly. Not yet. But I intend to. Back at the ranch. The evening settled peacefully over the valley. Mei sat alone on the porch, watching the sunset. Jack carried 2 mugs of coffee outside. He handed one to her. She accepted it with both hands. Thank you. After several minutes, she finally spoke. I've been thinking. Jack waited. You said I would always have a choice. Yes. If I agreed, would I still be free to leave one day? Jack answered without hesitation. Yes. If you never loved me, you would still leave here with my respect. Mei looked down into her cup. Her eyes glistened. Not because she loved him already, but because she realized this was the first promise anyone had ever made. Without asking for something in return. She took a slow breath. Then quietly said, I'll marry you. Jack didn't smile immediately. He simply nodded once. As your own decision. She met his eyes. My own. For the first time in many years. 2 lonely people felt the weight of loneliness become just a little lighter. Neither of them noticed. Far beyond the fence, a rider stood on the distant hill, watching the Carter ranch through a spyglass. Silas Morton lowered the glass slowly. His cold smile returned. So. That's where she disappeared. He turned his horse toward town. Certain that the young woman at Jack Carter's ranch was worth far more than either of them realized. The wedding took place 3 days later. No orchestra. No grand church. No rows of polished wooden pews filled with smiling guests. Only a weathered chapel on the edge of Silver Creek. A gray-haired pastor. Ben Harper. Mrs. Turner. And 2 witnesses who had known Jack long enough to trust his heart. Mei wore the same pale blue dress she had arrived in. She had washed it twice by hand. Carefully mended every loose thread. She apologized to Jack before they left the ranch. I'm sorry. I don't have a proper wedding dress. Jack looked at her for several seconds before answering. You came here with dignity. You don't need another dress to prove it. For the first time. She looked at him without lowering her eyes. The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. When Pastor Collins asked whether either of them entered the marriage willingly, Jack answered first. I do. Then everyone turned toward Mei. She drew a slow breath. I do. Her voice was soft, but steady. No one noticed the man watching from across the street. Silas Morton. His expression never changed. But his eyes narrowed the moment he saw the marriage certificate signed. He quietly mounted his horse and rode away. Life settled into an unexpected rhythm. Jack continued repairing fences, breaking horses, selling cattle. Mei never allowed herself to remain idle. She planted vegetables behind the cabin. She repaired torn curtains. She polished the old piano Eleanor had once loved. Every evening, fresh flowers appeared in a small glass jar beside Eleanor's photograph. One evening Jack noticed them. You don't have to do that. Mei smiled gently. I know. I wanted to. Jack looked at the picture of his late wife. Then quietly said, I think she'd like you. Mei lowered her eyes. I hope she wouldn't mind me living here. Jack shook his head. Eleanor never believed love was something you buried. She believed. If your heart healed enough to care for someone again, that was proof love had done its job. The words lingered between them. Neither spoke again that evening. Yet something inside both of them quietly changed. Weeks passed. The ranch slowly came back to life. Neighbors who had once whispered now found excuses to visit. Some came to buy eggs. Some came for vegetables. Most simply wanted to see whether the stories were true. Mrs. Turner laughed one afternoon. I've never seen this place look so alive. Jack smiled. Neither have I. Mei pretended not to hear. But the corners of her mouth lifted. Then winter arrived. Earlier than expected. A fierce snowstorm swept across the valley. Late one afternoon, a frightened boy rode desperately toward the ranch. His horse collapsed before reaching the gate. My father. He went after missing cattle. He hasn't come back. Without hesitation, Jack saddled Thunder. I'll find him. Mei stepped forward. I'm coming. The mountain trails are dangerous. I know the eastern pass. I walked through it coming here. Jack hesitated. Then nodded once. They rode into the storm together. Snow blinded them. Wind erased every trail. Hours passed. Finally, Mei spotted something half buried beneath drifting snow. A torn leather glove. She pointed. This way. Only a few hundred yards farther. They found the missing rancher trapped beneath a fallen pine tree. Jack struggled to lift the trunk. It wouldn't move. Mei climbed from her horse without thinking. Ignoring the freezing wind. Ignoring the snow soaking through her boots. Together, they managed to free the injured man. The rescue took nearly another hour. By the time they returned to Silver Creek, night had already fallen. The entire town stood waiting. When the rescued rancher explained who had found him, everyone looked toward Mei. The same people who had questioned why she belonged there now removed their hats. One by one. No speeches. No applause. Only quiet respect. Mrs. Turner smiled proudly. I told you. Good people reveal themselves. Silas Morton watched everything from outside the crowd. His plans were beginning to crumble. Respect made people difficult to manipulate. He needed another approach. The following week, he arrived at Carter Ranch wearing an expensive wool coat. 2 hired men stood behind him. Jack walked onto the porch. What do you want? Silas removed a folded document from his pocket. This concerns your wife. Mei stepped outside. Silas unfolded several papers. I've been searching for months. It appears Miss Mei Lin's late father once borrowed money. The debt remains unpaid. He smiled coldly. According to these documents, everything belonging to his family became mine. His eyes settled on Mei. That includes her employment contract. Jack studied the papers. Something felt wrong. The ink looked fresh. The signatures uneven. Silas continued confidently. She'll be leaving with me. Mei's face turned pale. Not because she believed him. Because the words reminded her of a life she thought she'd escaped. Jack slowly folded the papers. Then handed them back. I've spent 20 years signing cattle contracts. I know forged signatures when I see them. Silas's smile disappeared. You accusing me of fraud? Jack didn't raise his voice. I'm telling you to leave. Silas stepped closer. This isn't over. Jack's expression never changed. It is on my land. Ben Harper arrived moments later with 2 deputies. Mrs. Turner had quietly ridden into town the moment Silas entered the ranch. Sheriff Dawson examined the documents. Within minutes, he noticed 3 obvious inconsistencies. Wrong county seal. Wrong recording date. A signature belonging to a judge who had died 2 years before the document claimed to be signed. The sheriff looked at Silas. You'd better explain this. Silas realized the game was over. He attempted to leave. The deputies stopped him before he reached his horse. As they placed him under arrest, he glared at Mei. This isn't finished. She looked back calmly. Yes. It is. For the first time, she believed her own words. Spring returned to Wyoming. Snow melted across the hills. Wildflowers covered the valley. The Carter Ranch flourished like never before. Children from nearby homesteads often stopped to help feed the horses. Travelers knew they would always find a warm meal there. No one referred to Mei as the Chinese girl anymore. She became simply Mrs. Carter. One quiet evening, Jack sat on the porch watching the sunset. Mei joined him carrying 2 cups of tea. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Jack reached into his pocket. He removed a folded piece of paper. I wanted to give you this. She opened it. Her heart stopped. It was a legal document, transferring half of the Carter Ranch into her name. She looked up in disbelief. You've already given me more than I could ever repay. Jack smiled gently. I didn't give you a home. You helped build one. Tears filled her eyes. Months earlier, she had arrived carrying everything she owned inside a small cloth bundle. Now, she belonged somewhere. Not because of a marriage certificate. Not because of a promise. But because someone had looked beyond her past and seen her future. Mei quietly folded the document. Then reached into her apron pocket. She removed the small brass key Jack had left beside her bed on the first night. She placed it gently into his hand. Jack looked confused. You don't need this anymore. She smiled through tears. I locked that door because I was afraid. She gently closed his fingers around the key. I've finally found a place where I don't need to. Jack slipped the key back into her palm. No. It still belongs to you. Not because you need protection. But because every door in this house will always open for you by choice. Mei's eyes filled once more. She leaned her head softly against his shoulder. The prairie stretched endlessly before them. The same road where Jack had first found a frightened young woman beneath a cottonwood tree now shimmered beneath the golden light of sunset. This time, no one was walking it alone. Sometimes, The greatest love stories don't begin with two people searching for each other. Sometimes they begin with one person offering kindness when the other has almost forgotten kindness exists. And years later, whenever travelers stopped at the Carter Ranch and asked how Jack and May first met, Jack always smiled before answering. She came looking for a job. May would laugh softly beside him. And somehow, I found a family instead.